So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the audition scales. My students often neglect these, and I have found over the years that anyone who neglected the scales really didn't get into All-State. I've had many students who did get into All-State, and those who placed the highest in the band and those who felt the most confident about it practiced those scales over and over again and in many different ways from very early on. If you look at the rubric that you can find online, I'm looking at it here. The scales are worth 20 points. 10 points for notes, 5 points for the articulation accuracy, and 5 points for speed. And I will tell you that my students always think they should play these faster. But clearly, it's worth twice as much to play the notes right as it is to play them fast. So that would be my first point. When you play these, it's hard to play one after the other and change the keys. The first thing to do is learn each scale individually. For example, I'll take one of the harder scales, A major. It was okay, but there was a little blurb. There was a little blip in the arpeggio. Let me do that again. It's a little awkward. My thumb doesn't always want to play quite the right thing. In general, the arpeggios are definitely the most difficult part of this. When I ask my students to practice the scales different ways, one thing they often do is play only the arpeggios for a week. And so on. If the arpeggios aren't that clean and that steady when you play it slowly, you will never be secure playing them fast, and you'll probably miss at least a third of them in the audition. And once again, half of your points come from the notes. So practicing the scales slowly and practicing the arpeggios alone is very important. Playing with the articulation sounding nice is also important. And all tonguing and articulation patterns that work well, all that technique comes from excellent air. So, for example, D major, I would practice all slurred. If my fingers aren't steady, they won't line up with my tongue and it will sound sloppy. If my air isn't steady, my tone won't be beautiful. So when I know it's good slurred, then I'll add the tonguing. My students often neglect the chromatic scale because if you've studied with me for many years, you've been playing the chromatic scale since you were about 10, and they think, oh, I can do that. This chromatic scale is a little different. This chromatic scale doesn't start at the bottom and go as high as you can play. It starts on C and it goes down to low E. Then it goes up only to F with an articulation change in an unusual spot. So even if you are aces at your chromatic scale, it's really wise to practice this chromatic scale just as it is.